We're
Hello.
live. Hello,
Everybody
friends.
out there in Hadland, are you all okay?
They can't tell us anymore because we've turned comments off. So that's just have to
Next response. Hi,
themselves.
everybody. So we have a guest. This is Gareth Benjamin Streeter, as some of you know. Because sometimes when I do this, and when it comes back on the playback, it's the same. Anyway,
We're different.
one who's not one of us. He's the different person this week.
Very
So Gareth
different.
is here to talk to us about his history hero, which he will do momentarily. As you know, this is History Heroes. This is our final hero of the series. As we were talking about a little bit last week, we had just got to the point where we had some letters left and nothing to do with them. So this week it is Z for Richard II.
Because a 2 is like a Z.
It very much is.
That's our story, and we're sticking to it.
Yes. We know what we mean, even if nobody else does. So, Gareth, first of all, thank you so much for coming down and joining us. We've been really looking forward to having you. Before we allow you to introduce yourself or any of the rest of us, because it probably won't be you, says something really deplorable and people might not be expecting it. Kat, can you do the disclaimer, please?
I will disclaim away. I'm just keeping an eye because I do have the small sproglet. He's sleeping currently, so we'll go before he awakens and demands things. Hello, friends. It's Wednesday. It's just gone 8:15. This is History After Dark. We called it that for a variety of reasons. Principal among them was that on our other social media platforms, we are the souls of decorum and ladylike grace. Never doth a four-letter expletive summon forth from our lips. But here is a place where we can let our freak flags fly. We can swear. We can indulge in smut, filth, innuendo, innuendo. So if you are in a open plan office with a judgmental boss, put a headphone in. If you're in a kitchen, a car, a basement with a small child, that child is a problem. We call him Timmy. Have you got your mug out? Get your mugs out.
I haven't got my
Timmy
merch.
is a problem.
Sorry.
Check out our merch store. We've got the merch. Timmy's the sort of child that hears one depraved thing one time, locks it away in his mind palace, takes it to school with him, tells that depraved thing to his teacher. In my head, she's Miss Honey from Matilda. She does not listen to History After Dark on account of Miss Honey from Matilda. So she breaks the first cardinal rule of History After Dark, namely, if you don't know what it means, don't Google it. It's not for you. That's fine. But she does Google it. And now you're called up to school. You've got to explain why Timmy knows this unspeakable filth. And also you're on the hook for 12 weeks of therapy because Miss Honey's in the fetal position, non-verbal. And that's not ideal for a primary school teacher. Put a headphone in. Alternatively, you can watch us on the playback on the YouTubes. Always worth watching us live because we have on one occasion said something that was so unspeakably depraved we had to yeet that footage directly into the sun. It's not happened for a while, which means one of three things. Firstly, we've gotten better, highly unlikely. Secondly, we're due another one, more likely. Thirdly, and I think principal among them is we have spent so much time together that we now have lowered the bar so far that it is in fact in hell. It's very clear what this is about. If at any point someone should come into our comment section, either here or elsewhere on social media, and say anything along the lines of, "Oh, I find you very interesting, the history, but do you have to swear so much? It's very vulgar." Stop it. We know what you're doing. You want me to pin that comment so that other people can come and humiliate you. Look, if you've got a kink, that's okay. I won't shame you. They might. But kink without consent is not okay. If your passion is being humiliated by a buxom wench who will nibble on your tool, do unspeakable things to you with a car battery, and stick a butt plug in the shape of a garden nose so far up your jacksie that you'll whistle till Tuesday, I've got a number of names. There's some brilliant bright embracements that I can tell you about. Jasmine, all of her clothes are wiped clean, but you're paying for the privilege and she's consented. This is History After Dark. Let's talk about Richard II. What?
That is a brilliant disclaimer.
It's a work of art. It's been sort of. The thing is when we do other things that aren't going to require the disclaimer, it would never feel quite right somehow not having it, even if it wasn't relevant.
I'd tone it down in ways. I don't know how.
Ignore the bits that aren't relevant. Okay, so yes, Richard II. So some of
I think it's a bad rap, but I like him, and I want to hear why you like him too, Gareth.
Somebody I think that a lot of people really don't know an awful lot about. He's not one of sort of the big name heavy hitters, is he? Like a lot of the people we tend to end up talking about. So you are here today to tell us why he's fabulous. First of all, though, tell everybody a little bit about you, who you are, and what you do.
Oh, wow. That is a question. Well, first of all, I'm sorry I'm a bit overdressed. I've literally just got back to I'm away with work at the moment. So I've been sort of corporate Gareth today. Tomorrow, Thursdays tend to be more my sort of history Gareth day. So I'm a bit overdressed. I'm also a couple of pints in, if I'm being really, really honest about it. So let's sort of take everything that comes in the spirit of that. I'm
Perfect.
like all of you, I am many things. I am a good boy. I can't lie. Like I've got a bit of a wicked sense of humor, which gets me into trouble more days than it doesn't. But I am a good boy. So I don't, my followers on social media wouldn't have too many sort of clutching their pearls moments. But I love this podcast because I said to you guys before we went live, but I'm going to say it. There is some brilliant history content out there, and it is. But this is the only one I've come across that's trying to do something different. And I just feel that podcasting has given so many opportunities of the different sorts of things you can do. Like I'm a massive comics geek. I'm a geek on many things. And in the sort of comics world, there's so many interesting different formats of things you can do. And people just have fun together. History doesn't just have to be the latest historian promoting their book. Having said that, I've got a book. Anyone wants to buy it, that's cool.
Right.
I basically started blogging about history about 10 years ago, and then it probably really got going during the pandemic. And since then I've written a book. I'm doing a lot of stuff. I'm doing some postgrad research at the moment, actually, which is really, really, really amazing. So history is my sort of great passion, I guess. I've got a few others too. And I kind of stumbled into doing stuff publicly by accident. I think lots of us do. And I've got no game plan for it. I've got no strategy for it, as is evidently obvious from everything I ever do. But to create opportunities to be on stuff like this is a huge privilege for me. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you for coming.
And getting us in on your changeover evening from corporate history, Gareth. It's probably perfect, actually.
You can let go of the corporate day now. It is behind.
I like the way the lubrication, the beer has to come in for
Hello.
transition as well. Yeah, sorry.
I do worry about what your history day might be like after we've lubricated you out of corporate Gareth. I fear what the content of tomorrow's history day might be. I'm living for it. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens.
Well, to be honest, me too. I mean, I haven't really been lubricated since the 90s, if I'm completely honest. So, anything tomorrow, who knows what sensations I'll be feeling tomorrow.
That's what we do.
Already we're booking Gareth in for another visit back to the house.
On the list. So Richard is a bit of a controversial one. I mean, he gets a bit of a rough ride. I know him. I came across him first of all, really through Shakespeare.
Okay, yeah.
So I think he gets maybe not as rough a ride as he might deserve in some cases in Shakespeare. But what do you love about him?
So one thing I should say, do you want to know a really weird thing about me?
Yeah.
Or should we talk about history? No, one of my weird history things is I've never seen or read any of the Shakespeare history plays. The reason is because I went to school in the sort of trendy era of education where it was just about how does Francis Drake make you feel kind of thing. So we didn't really we did do some Shakespeare, but we didn't do much. And I'm not, my other half's a massive theatre lover, and I've never been that into the theatre. I'm like, there's like a TV right there in the living room, don't you? Could we not just like, you had to find Netflix because it's opening up a whole new world. I'm not that cultured, and I don't actually I love history and I love fiction. I'm not that big on historical fiction. I'm like, if I want to do history, I want an archive and I want a 15th century regional Clark Hand that takes ages to read. If I want to do fiction, I want to see Thor. Do you know what I mean? I want to see, that kind of thing. So I've never
want to see Thor, babe.
We must.
Well, Thor's hammer and all the rest of it. Insert joke here. But so I've never done none of my. And sort of I occasionally, very rarely, could be a little bit provocative in debates around Richard III. And I've always
rarely. Did you
rarely.
You poke the beehive, the bear warren, whatever it's called, the bear pit.
Bear warren.
I love it.
Bear warren.
The bear warren.
Yeah,
Hey,
it's like two personalities inhabit this body, and one is lovely, and one occasionally just wakes up wishing anger upon myself, and sort of distortion within the Richard III sort of sphere of gravity. But so, and then people would say to me, "Oh, you're just so influenced by Shakespeare." I've never seen Richard III in any form, and now that I feel I'm so far into actually loving that era of history, because that's the bit Shakespeare wrote about are my sweet spot, basically. I almost feel I don't want to now, but probably one day I should. So I definitely don't have any impressions of Richard II from Richard III, but basically, I mean, I should say, obviously, Richard II is not my history hero in the broadest sense of the term, in that there are probably better candidates for that qualification. But I am really interested in Henry Tudor, as you know, anyone as both my followers probably know. And basically the narrative, and this is where I get really boring, so it's probably not a great start for the podcast. I'm really fascinated with the debate around the extent to which Henry Tudor, Henry VII, restored stability to the institution of monarchy, and created, to the extent he did or didn't, the foundations of the modern state and the institutions of government. Cool. That is fun, isn't it? It is a wild ride. And I guess when you study that, the traditional narrative, which doesn't just come from Shakespeare, is that instability started in the reign of Richard II. So I'm like, all right, let's check that out. And about 4 years ago, I got a commission to write a book on Arthur Tudor, Henry VII's son. But before I got that, and me and Philip have talked about that, but before, again, quite generous, given the caliber of guests that you normally get to speak to me, is very generous indeed. But before that, I was actually working on, I didn't have a commission, but I was working on a book about Richard II. And the fall of Richard II, and how that all came about, because I had this sort of grandiose sort of vision of writing about the whole of the 15th century, starting with the fall, basically the rise of the House of Lancaster, and then the fall of the House of York, and then the beginnings of Henry VII's reign. So I got really into the fall of Richard II, and basically, I think Richard II did some terrible things and made some terrible mistakes, but if you were minded to give the same generosity of spirit that some people give to the third Richard, to the second Richard, I think you could as easily cast a narrative saying he was very misunderstood and very much deserving of a reappraisal. I think if you use the same methodology that fans of Richard III use, which there's some validity in, there is, then Richard II could come across to us very differently.
Do you think, shall we put Richard into context? Because he's sort of, he can be one of the monarchs that sort of people have heard of, maybe Peasants' Revolt, maybe, but not like, can we put some context around him?
So I think that's that's really good. So really good point, because actually people sort of broadly know what Edward III, and then they wake up again maybe around Henry V, but there's that kind of bit in between that's been like, so Richard II came to the throne as a 9-year-old in 1377, and it's not clear exactly when his, if you like, personal rule began, but there were lots of ups and downs. His grandfather, Edward III, had been probably the most successful medieval king by the standards of the day that England had ever known. Maybe Henry V later would be seen to be even more successful, who ruled for a very, very, very long time. And Edward's son, Richard's dad, was Edward the Black Prince, who, as Prince of Wales, was another great warlord, seen to be the best king England ever had, although who knows what would have happened in eventuality. But he died just before his dad, basically about a year before, I think it was, leaving a young child, Richard II, as the heir to the throne. Richard rules not brilliantly successfully throughout his regency, but perhaps not. There is no formal regency, even though he's 9 when he comes to the throne. and advisors of his father effectively rule, but perhaps exclude some of the major powers or people who felt they should have been and probably should have been the major powers in the first few years. Richard increasingly, as you get into the 1380s, starts to take more control of government. It goes pretty badly. And Richard seems to have this great divine right of kings. Now, all kings arguably did, but he had very much a sense of, I'm the king, and pretty much everyone should do what I say. That was perhaps reinforced where the peasants' revolt, which I think would be very difficult to blame Richard for, but was basically a result of the Black Death in the years before Richard's time, had created a huge opportunity for the peasant class to actually start creating a market, actually saying, I will go to whoever will pay me most, which is, not an unreasonable thing for people to want, honest wages for their work. And that should have been a natural social progression that came out of the reduced peasant population of the Black Death. Parliament and the landowning class cracked down on that. They basically forbid that and say, no, you just have to do whatever your overlord says you have to do. And there's understandably, among other things as well, and some poll taxes that followed to fund wars that meant very little to the peasant class, but meant perhaps more to the people that had opportunities higher up the social ladder to benefit from them. They revolt. Richard is seen to manage that seamlessly well, despite being very, very young. That perhaps restores in his mind a sense that he is God's appointed. He is the one that can do this. And he becomes incredibly difficult to work with, I suppose. And then over the years, that comes into a confrontation at Radcot Bridge, where basically the senior noblemen of the realm wrestle power off of Richard before he's 20. So there's a little bit of a proviso of, it's not you we're against, it's your mean advisors. Banish the people close to him. And then Richard does something very, very clever, is that he stops being I'm a divine right of kings person. That's not the language he used then, as we all know. And he becomes a very tactical politician. He makes alliances. He works out what he needs to do and who he needs to impress. And he wins back power very quickly. Doesn't do anything radically for a few years. And then in 1397, executes the most seamlessly and ruthlessly thought out plan to get revenge on the people that basically gainsayed him in the decade before, and restores royal authority to a level that Henry VIII could only have dreamt of, then makes one final miscalculation in the following years and loses his throne. And had it not been for that final miscalculation, I think we might see Richard not just as a despot that got too big for his boots, but as someone that did something the Tudors did quite successfully 100 years later, in terms of reducing the power of the nobility, centralizing the power of monarchy, and weaning England off the addiction of being a war-centric economy. And I think we could, had it not been for that final miscalculation, see him as one of the great reforming kings of our time. And we now never will.
Oh, wow.
That was a bit boring, wasn't
Strong
it?
case.
No, it was absolutely fascinating, and it was incredibly articulately put. And I think that is something that's always stood out for me about Richard, is that he casts aside all of these warlord kings, and that's why people say he's not good. But he is, to misuse a term, he is a Renaissance prince before England had Renaissance princes.
That's exactly it. Yeah. And he wasn't as anti-war as people make out. I mean, there was very, very good reasons not to carry on with a policy of aggression toward France.
Yeah, they're bigger than us.
Yeah. But can I just say one more thing? I'm very glad I never wrote my book on the fall of Richard II and the rise of the House of Lancaster, because more recently, Helen Castor has written this book on exactly that topic. And basically, if I'd written a book before that, Helen Castor's book would now be like spanking my book so hard, my book would not sit down for a decade. And I'm so glad that I will never resume that project, because I would never dare to try and compete with a book like Helen Castor's. and I just want to say I haven't, because I've been so busy, I haven't finished Helen's book yet. But every single time I thought something and Helen Castor disagrees, I totally realize she's right. So if I say anything on this podcast tonight and someone says, oh, Helen Castor disagrees, Helen Castor is right. And when I just get to that bit of the book, I will know that. So please don't ever take anything I say as contradicting her, because it's a brilliant book.
It is a very good book.
Have you guys read it?
I'm about a quarter to a third of the way through at the moment. Yeah.
Because you do want to take your time with it, don't you? It's not
There's
like
a lot
really
of information. Yeah. And it's the toing and froing that, of course, as soon as you get into any story, that detail comes out. You know, it's not a linear story with maybe a couple of steps back. It's all over the shop, all over the time, I find. And you're trying to remember, you know, who's where and when doing what and what they said last time and what they're saying this time.
Yeah.
But it brings them to life. But yeah.
And it's also really hard because Richard loved changing people's titles. That was like his kink. And so like you're like, okay. And so you're really like, oh, who the fuck is like Earl of Mail at the moment?
This week.
I think she mentioned something about that in the beginning. Is it her?
She's got like this person is the Duke of York at this time.
I'm going to say
the Earl of Cambridge could be this. It could also be all the Duke of Mail, or it could be and it's just like. And everyone's like, "Oh, John Beaufort is the Marquess of Dorset." No, he's the Earl of Somerset again. You know, it is all just like, so it's quite hard to keep up with that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But if they didn't make our lives difficult enough.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I assume it would also have made the nobility's life fairly difficult if you're like, oh, go and ask Somerset if he's in on this plan, and then Somerset's somebody different, and that person might then come back to Richard. It's a very good way of confusing people who might be going against you if they're all now using different names that you've given them. Like you've given them different code names and swapped it around, and only it's the Enigma code, but for people plotting.
Also, there's different lands that come with different titles, and so that must have been an admin nightmare.
Yeah, they've got to move. They've got to figure out how to do the land holding. It's changing their titles in that way feels like a reward, but it's one of those rewards. It's like when people bring women like beautiful bunches of flowers. It's a job to do.
Yeah. I've always used to say that. She's like,
it's lovely, but you've given me work. Thank you.
But isn't it also like I'm not actually a woman, but I have seen women, and isn't it, I know. But isn't there even a pressure if you're bought really nice jewellery? It's like you've got to remember to wear it next time you see that person.
That's
quite a passive aggressive gift, isn't it? It's like I'm going to control what you wear next time you see me.
Luckily for me, people know I've got a horrendously shit memory, so they have very low expectations of me in that type of way. So I just go, oh no, you know what I'm like, and they go, yeah, fair.
Yeah, it's when you're bought clothes and you're like, that's probably not going to be for me. Probably not. Almost certainly not going to be what I want.
Oh, you're not wearing your new shoes then? Is that kind of aggressive?
But that Richard II would totally have been that, though. Like you would have to have worn what he got. I mean, the best thing about Richard II, all I've just said about the constitutional stuff, like supposedly according to one chronicler, if he looked at you during a great state banquet, you had to drop to a bow and like drop to your knees if he looked your way. And I'm like, I mean, there is just no way on God's earth that if I was king, I would not do that. I mean, that would actually be my whole approach to kingship. And you can't hate that.
No, because we don't do it.
He definitely had an eye for the performative, didn't he?
Yeah.
And he has an eye for propaganda. I'm thinking that the portrait that's up in Westminster Abbey of him, and of course the Wilton diptych is him, isn't it?
Talk about that as well.
He's got an eye for how he is portrayed and seen in person and not.
Yeah, I mean, he was born. I mean, what's interesting? Obviously, religious imagery was important to everyone in that. So, you know, that's not in and of itself special. But he was born on the Feast of the Epiphany. So, not unsurprisingly, which is when the day that the wise men reached Jesus and gave the gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And so, not understandably, the imagery around his birth, both probably at the time and certainly later, was about him being the chosen child, being brought gifts. Now, we've got to remember that when Richard was born, he was not the direct heir to the throne. He did have an older brother who died quite soon after. So Richard was there from quite early on. So that imagery wasn't necessarily about you're the chosen one and you're going to be king. It was just you're born on the Feast of the Epiphanies, and that's kind of what we do because we take our lead from that creatively. But you can't blame the lad for it. That was sort of the story that he grew up with, thinking I may be the chosen one of God. That's a lot.
And I think that with those portraits, I think most people will be familiar with them. So we have that kind of the coronation portrait, a full length, hyper realistic for the time, almost very Renaissance image. It's the sort of thing that you could imagine a Holbein producing, but
absolutely
it's years too early. And the Wilton diptych, while it is aggrandizing in the extreme, both of those things, when you see them in the flesh, are among the most beautiful objects ever created by human hands. Particularly in the diptych, the use of blue, which I'm assuming is lapis. Is lapis lazuli? Would that be the blue?
Yeah. Well,
very expensive. It's this. It's the what's normally used for the Virgin Mary, but the whole host, and the gold leaf all over everything, like it is bling bling.
And I've read, and I don't know if this is true because my art history isn't brilliant, I have to say, but this series of Richard II portraits are, I believe, the first probable likeness of any English king that we have that's more than there's an attempt at portraiture. This is probably the first one.
Yeah, more than bloke in crown with beard. Yeah. And
that's huge.
It's a massive deal. And he's commissioning that. He's asking for that. And he's positioning himself, particularly in the diptych, he's aligning himself with England's saints. And he is essentially putting himself as, so you've got the host of angels all wearing his badge. And then you've got him. And then whoever's got the arrows in, that's Edmund. And then you've got Saint Edward as well, the confessor.
Right.
Who are, of course, royal saints, king saints, and English saints as well.
Interestingly, the badge was, of course, his downfall. Because one of the things that Henry VII realised after the Wars of the Roses is, well, of course, Henry VII had a badge in the form of the Tudor Rose, but you don't, if you're the king, you don't act like the biggest of the lords, you act like the Lord of the Lords. And Richard II's, although, as I said, it's only a mistake because it didn't work, it very nearly did work, was he started to, after his initial sort of fall from grace in the 1480s, he built his power base very strongly around the lands that he owned as Earl of Chester and Prince of Wales, which were his directly held crown lands, I suppose. And that arguably, and this is a bit of a later read by historians, but some very, very, very capable historians make this point well, that arguably diminished the crown somewhat because he became the biggest of the dukes rather than the Lord of all Lords. And making people wear his personal livery rather than the regalia of England in terms of their loyalty to him was arguably his biggest mistake, other than taking on the inheritance of the House of Lancaster and trying to deprive Bolingbroke of his patrimony.
And was that to do with a show of force? That the livery wearing, almost like I've got my little personal army here. Was that?
Yeah, very, very, very much. So the Revenge Parliament of 1497, 97, 98, 97, I think, was a really important moment. Like I say, in the 1480s, Richard had kind of lost power. And because he was still sort of 20-ish, there was a bit of cover that people could rebel against his ministers rather than him, and you just be corrupted, etc., etc. We see that with Henry VI, he's in his 40s. So there's obviously some leniency as to when you can pretend that a king's not accountable for his actions. And he's basically, restrictions are put on him, and he has to rule through effectively a council that the nobility have set up. He shakes that off pretty quickly, but rather than strike back, he takes some time. Like, he learned that revenge is a dish best served cold. So he formed a strategic alliance to an extent with his uncle, John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster, who'd spent most of the 1480s in Iberia, trying to become like King of Portugal, because I think that's what you do when you're bored and you're a third son. And that was probably to Richard's detriment, because perhaps John of Gaunt would have been the only one that could have reined him in a bit. He forms an alliance with him. He starts to advance John of Gaunt's very precious Beaufort children, who of course will become major players in the century that follows, and starts to help bring them in from the cold. He makes his peace with Gaunt's eldest legitimate son, Henry, who will become Henry IV, Henry Bolingbroke. And he starts to build other relationships with his uncles, and he gets people back on side. But then what he also does is he starts recruiting massively retainers from his personal lands. And the chroniclers, I should say, nearly all the chroniclers we have about the last decade of Richard's reign are written in Lancastrian times. So we have to apply a hermeneutic of suspicion to them. Now, some are supportive, so and some are written overseas, so they're not all sort of reciting Henry IV narrative, but nevertheless, we don't really have much by way of contemporary in the 1490s, strictly speaking. But they talk about these very aggressive, brutish, muscly men that sort of rustle up at Westminster wearing the king's badge of the heart, and that is that sets the scene of intimidation before the Revenge Parliament of 1497. And have any of you ever read any of the chronicler accounts of that Parliament? Because they are hilarious. No. Because it's basically a load of scared men trying to dob the others in, and like they say, "Oh well, I didn't really mean it when I opposed you at Radcott Bridge, sire. It was all a rundle," and it was all that sort of these Mowbrays. You don't you lie, Henry? You said to me, "We hate the king," and all, and it's really like just lose control of Parliament kind of stuff. And there, the king then very cleverly makes some high-profile sacrifices. His uncle, the Duke of Gloucester, who'll be the forerunners of the Duke of Buckingham's in the 15th century, he mysteriously dies at the same time, which is about as mysterious as any of these other. I mean, he was older, he could have been ill, I guess, but it's very convenient. Some of the people that opposed Richard are killed or trumped up charges, and some he very publicly grants mercy to. But what he does is he creates a huge suspicion around those that are left, and actually in a turn of events that must have absolutely amazed him, two of his former enemies who he'd forgiven, his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, the future Henry IV, and Mowbray, who by that point is the Duke of Norfolk, who is the ancestor of the Howard family, which Catherine and others will know very, very, very well, actually end up falling out themselves because there's such a culture of suspicion of, oh, you said that, I said that, etc., that they end up having a dispute. The king says they've got to settle it with a duel, and he ends up being able to banish them both. And that's his kind of opportunistic way of getting revenge on everyone. And I think he would have got away with that. But a year later, Uncle John of Gaunt dies. Henry of Lancaster should be inheriting. And Richard leaves him, a desperate man with nothing to lose, by saying, no, he's naughty. He doesn't get the land. It's all mine. That horrible, inconvenient, massive patrimony of the Lancaster lands, which has been a thorn in the side of the crown for some years, is now Richard's, and I've won. And had it not been for giving Bolingbroke nothing to lose, I think Richard would have kept his crown.
And does the taking of Henry Bolingbroke's lands, I seem to remember reading somewhere that made the rest of the nobility nervous.
Yes. I mean, arguably it's a violation of Magna Carta, because he hadn't been attainted by Act of Parliament. So it's and also Richard had done lots of dodge stuff. I mean, this is where, yes, I think we could have seen it very differently if he'd pulled it off. But there's some pretty dodgy stuff, like he made everyone just sign blank charters. So like you just had to like sign, maybe.
You can see through him today.
Oh,
How old, Kat?
He is 2 months and he wants a bottle of milk. So I'm just going to do that while I'm on mute. I am listening and I'm fascinated, but he's loud, so I'm going to mute him myself.
Is a reasonable request. Yeah. So he had made everybody basically after the Revenge Parliament, which is Richard at the zenith of his power. He does two things. He rewards everyone, so he creates a load of dukedoms and promotes people, which actually arguably devalues the whole grade of duke. And then he makes everyone who's got anything to lose sign a blank charter, which of course at any stage he could write in, "I am a traitor. Oh look, you signed this." So he's got everyone on their toes. But it's not that different. I mean, it is different, but it's a similar principle to what Edward IV and Henry VII would do in a century later, where they basically say, here's a fine you can't afford to pay. And we all know that, and that's fine, isn't it? Because we're friends. But should anything go wrong and I needed to call in that debt that you couldn't pay, that's going to get messy, isn't it? So something to think about. It's not that different a principle to what Richard's doing there. And this is why I did a post on Instagram and Blue Sky, because I'm on Blue Sky now, saying Richard II, bad king or a century ahead of his time. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, this policies he pursued are not that different to those successfully pursued by Edward IV and Henry VII, and we see them as the great statesmen that ended the Wars of the Roses. Although I'm a bit worried because Helen Castor sort of replied saying, yeah, obviously Richard II was terrible, not ahead of his time. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm probably wrong then.
well, no, it's just about different. This is one of the things about the history and the way we like to look at it, is just to look at all these different perspectives, because you never know what thought processes you're going to spark in people. Not even just, we're talking about Richard II here, but you don't even know what thought processes might spark in somebody about something completely different they hadn't considered before. And I think every conversation, no, there's always going to be one or two exceptions, but let's just say that every conversation has value to it. There are always going to be one or two that haven't, but it's just if you don't know much about something, this particular topic, it's just going to take you down lots of different rabbit holes, which is really important. And we always say, and Gareth, you might have heard us say this, the more you think, that the more you find out, the more you learn, the more you should realize you don't know.
Oh, absolutely.
So every time you think something and then something comes along and challenges it, and it doesn't matter who said one thing and who said the other, mostly, everyone's got different reasons for having the opinions that they have because of their life experiences, the things that they've read, the conversations that they've had with people, the places that they visited. So, it's, you sort of, obviously I haven't read Helen's book, and obviously Philippa has, and you're reading it, but I think you're putting yourself to your own detriment compared to her. But obviously what you're saying, I think, is really thought-provoking, making a really good case for the sort of the positive elements of what Richard was able to, whether people liked him or not, actually his kingship was, people say, he didn't have a lot of the qualities that you needed to be a successful medieval king. Well, actually, perhaps he did. Like you say, he has been misinterpreted, and he was looking, but he was achieving that by different means. Maybe he had more of a long game plan, almost sort of slight psychological warfare going on. And generally, people just went, I don't like you. I think I might kill you. And he was like, I'm going to think about this. I'm still going to kill you, but I'm going to think about it first and go about it in a slightly different way. And like you said, maybe it was that one thing, he pushed it a little too far in the end, and that's what had been his undoing. But against
I really do think it's that. Yeah, I just think he's stupid, and this was stupid. So basically, my basic take is, when he thought he was God's, ordained king to do whatever he liked, he made serious mistakes. He then was taken down a perch or two, and he showed he could be a masterful politician. and he did very, very well. When that all went so well, I think he's a bit like, I'm God's chosen one again. I can get away with anything again. So bad luck, cuz I've got your land. And I think there again, that's the mistake. And you see that with other great political leaders. You know, you can look at, and I don't get political, so obviously everyone likes different people, but you can look at anyone from your Bill Clintons to your Margaret Thatchers to your Winston Churchills, and people who, when they are up against it, demonstrate the most remarkable grasp of their situation and play things very, very well. When they get cocksure and think they're the bee's knees, they often, pride goes before a fall. And Richard II, I think that's my read on him. There's also some theories that he had sort of psychological self-destruct mechanism, which I think is fascinating. I don't know how we're ever going to know that, but I think that's fascinating.
That it's self-sabotage, which I'm sure most of us are familiar with, where things are going a little too well. Going too well. Something's going to go wrong. If I make it go wrong, then I'm in control of that going wrong. Or so goes the theory.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is some scholars who think he was quite keen to hand over the crown to his cousin, the son of the Duke of York, quite early on, as you know, and he wanted to do that quite soon. Partly because there's some thinks a lot of his policy in the 1490s was about becoming the Holy Roman Emperor, which would be ambitious for an English king, I think. And you look at his marriage strategy, then I think that's possible. And the other, there is also quite a lot about how he was very philosophical. And I haven't seen Shakespeare. As I understand it, Shakespeare picks up on this in terms of the heavy is the head that wears the crown. That is not that exact phrase, but that sort of sentiment of, you know, life is meaningless, nothing is worth anything, does come from Chronicles accounts around the time of his when he was deposed. So that's just an interesting angle.
So tell us a little bit about his marriage alliance, you know.
So his first marriage was to, I'm terrible, I made notes because I'm really bad at remembering the names of medieval queens. His first marriage when he was about 14, and his wife was a little bit older, which was neither of his wives, it should be said, ever massively played a major role as his active consort, because to start with he was too young, and then in his second marriage she was too young. So they're not, you know, you're not in a kind of Margaret of Anjou or Elizabeth Woodville kind of level of active consort at all, really, in Richard's reign. So his first marriage, I'm pretty sure, was Anne of Bohemia, but I'm so terrible with names. I'm pretty sure it was though, and she was the daughter of, I believe, the then Holy Roman Emperor. So there was a connection with there. She died. She's a little bit older than him. She's about 5 or 6 years older than him. She, to the best of our knowledge, she was never. There's no evidence to suggest she was ever pregnant. As we know, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But it doesn't look like that was the nature of their relationship massively, and he was quite young. He then, in the 1490s, marries the daughter of the French king, Isabella, who is 9 years old, and that has got him a lot of criticism from commentators today, which is entirely understandable. But I think it should be noted that she was living in a separate household. She wasn't near court. She was being raised separately, admittedly in England. And there is absolutely no suggestion that there was any physical dynamic whatsoever to their relationship. Now, I'm not saying I'm not saying it's great to take a 9-year-old girl off of her family and determine her destiny, but it is not a Margaret Beaufort, Edmund Tudor situation, if you see what I mean. And he's perhaps got some bad press for that. Although, of course, where people of his time were annoyed was not that he'd taken away the agency of this young woman, because of course that wasn't the mindset. It was that he got a queen who wasn't going to be delivering an heir to the throne anytime soon, and that was unstable politically.
Yeah. that's the problem. You come in with a child king, which is never. Could you argue though, possibly, that in this instance it was one of the more successful situations where you've had a young king come in compared to a lot of the other situations we've seen arise?
I think this is just my theory, and you're all students of the same era as I am, but I actually think we overplay the instability of child rule. I think England was all right at it. I think if you look at Henry VI, it wasn't without problem, but the real problem started when he took power, because he just couldn't. And I think with Richard II, and similarly with Henry III was such an unusual situation, wasn't he? Because of everything that had gone wrong with his dad. And yes, people rightly look at William Marshall as being thank goodness from the sake of the Plantagenet dynasty, he was there. But I'm not sure it was so awful. I'm not sure England can't handle child rule. And my theory with Edward V is not that he was a child; it's that he was nearly an adult. And that was what did for him, because he was going to be a very, very young adult under the influence of a faction, as was seen. So I'm not quite so sure that the child king thing's such a vulnerability in England's medieval constitution. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think I haven't
thought
about it. And now you've made me think about that. Because also
this is what I lie awake at night, Philippa, thinking about.
Yeah.
I'm inclined to agree that the process of having a very young child come to the throne is of itself not dangerous. The regency is not dangerous. There can, of course, be infighting. Thank you. As we see in Edward VI, there's infighting among the councillors. There's factionalism that can be risky. I do think there is a problem that when children come to the throne, the process that takes this divine infant, which they are after coronation, and makes them into a king that can hold the country, something goes awry. We manage the politics, but we don't bring them upright. Somehow we miss something.
Yeah,
that's what goes wrong.
Yeah.
What's fascinating, isn't it? And I wonder if this was a Richard II learning. Henry VI was made to sign a waiver in his childhood saying he would never take action or revenge against people that had to beat him in his youth, because saying, understanding as I do the waywardness of my youth, I know I need this discipline. And I wonder if that was a reaction to Richard II. I mean, maybe it was too long ago by then for there to be that recall, but who knows?
You see, I'd have gone, yeah, but I'm king now, so I'll change my mind.
Yeah, well, I signed under stress. Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting because if things go wrong in a child in a child's rule, that's kind of the go-to excuse or reasoning. Whereas plenty of stuff went wrong when adults, when adults took the throne as well. So maybe, I think it's a really interesting point, because it could just be that that's just the easy get at. And it's also interesting, of course, that then if you look at what went wrong, it's the absence of the one person who's given the direction. Well, as a society, as a culture, we've decided to move away eventually from one person rule. And yet when you look at what went wrong in these sorts of times, you think, oh well, it's because there wasn't one person directing. But that's not clearly how we've gone eventually anyway. So interesting point.
There is, I think, I don't know if I believe in the kind of classical tragedy notion of a fatal flaw, but if there is a fatal flaw, I think Richard's is not in his intellect, which is very clear. That's his benefit. His deficit is his drive and I think enjoyment of vengeance, and I think focused, targeted vengeance. And if the chronicles are to be believed, we see that at the Peasants' Revolt. Villains you are, absolutely. And villains you shall remain. There is a targeted, the cruelty is the point. And that is something that I think follows him. He is I'm going to think this through, but in a kind of maximum damage for other people kind of way.
You see, I can't fault that. I quite
Me neither.
like that.
But it doesn't win your friends or as a king.
No, and I think that's 100% right. And actually, when you read the accounts of how he basically enacted revenge on his uncle, the Duke of Gloucester, he rides in the night under the cover of darkness with men to this old man's house. He wakes him and his children, his wife. They all have to get out, bow but kneel before the king, sabotaged in the dead of night, and then charges are read. It's all designed. And this wasn't public. It wasn't a statement. It's designed to maximize discomfort. We don't know whether he was going to off the Duke of Gloucester. If he did, and the fact he did it privately, probably suggests he didn't think he could probably get the consensus around it. But yeah, and he toys with people. He lets old men think they're about to be killed and then saves them. And that's almost as cruel as doing it, isn't it? In some ways, in a vindictive way. Whereas you get to your Henry VII, and they do some terrible things. The Earl of Warwick, is the most obvious one. But there's a sense, and I might be wrong, and I'll be accused of being too partial to Henry VII, but he's doing it because he thinks it's necessary for the security of his kingdom and of himself, but he's not taking joy from it. And even I think with Richard III, I don't ever get the sense. Disclaimer, I think he probably killed the princess in the Tower. I don't ever get the sense that was an act of enjoyment. It was a ruthless and harsh decision to preserve his rule. With Richard II, and indeed with our good friend Henry VIII, I think you get a real sense of cruelty. I think you get a real sense of enjoyment.
Yeah.
And is that power, or is that something in his, we can't, I suppose, diagnose psychological traits, but does that come across as something in his psyche, or as a pure show of power? So
here's an answer and a non-answer, Philippa. I don't show anyone the fiction I write because I don't think it's a good enough standard, and because I don't read historical fiction, I'm not quite sure how good my own is. But I've writing occasionally some historical fiction stuff on Richard II's fall, and I sort of portray him as a masochist and into quite sort of BDSM kind of experiences, not because I think I enjoy writing about that sort of stuff or I know very much about it, if I'm completely honest.
Cat knows the one who can
I don't know, but because I read him as someone that enjoys pain and punishment, be that his own or be that other people's.
Interesting.
Is there evidence of self-harm, for want of a better term?
Not as far as I know. I mean, there's in the chronicle accounts around his disposition written by sympathetic people, because there was a sympathetic person with him the whole time who then went back to France and seems to have adored him. There's quite to say masochistic is probably not. There's a morbidity, perhaps, to his whole approach to the situation, which is resigned and philosophical and indulgent, maybe, which is where, from a sort of fiction point of view, I took it to a different level. But I mean, one of the other things is there is a school of thought that Richard II was gay or bisexual. I don't think we have that evidence. I don't think we really have any evidence on his sexuality, full stop, to be honest. But I guess, again, even that sort of debate gave me, I think, a bit of license to think, if you were to put that kind of masochistic, slightly indulgent, sulky, at best indulgent, sulky, at worst masochistic, into a physical context, what might that look like?
You see, I suppose he had that period, we were talking about when he was round about 20, where he was looked very poorly upon. So then you wonder if this sort of spiteful, nasty, masochistic streak, or however we want to describe it, already existed, and that's what brought it out, or if that turned a tide on his personality. And he'd seen what worked for people before and what hadn't, and realized that he needed to pull something different out the bag, and that's where his brain went. Or he was a git. It's or a bit of both. Bit of column A and column B, as Kat would say. Bit of each.
It's a bit like, well, no, I won't use that example because I don't think we have the evidence. But when, I mean, Catherine, you as a parent must see this an awful lot. Are you a parent, Philippa, as well? You know, with a kid, when they really kick off about something, you know, this is really bad. Like, I wish you weren't kicking off about this. But you're like, I kind of get it because it's genuine. Like, something's happened and your emotions are there and you just got to kick off. And I like the fact you can't contain this and that you can't just sit there in a calculated way, seethingly planning your revenge. I like the fact you just have to deal with this now because it's normal. I think with Richard, where we're seeing him able to make his peace with these people he clearly wanted dead for 10 years, you know, best part of, and probably be planning the whole time, have them around him, have them serving him. We all know how intimate that could be in terms of the king's household, knowing they're going to be dead or something quite close to dead. I think that's sinister. So I'm not shouldn't really be saying this because he's meant to be my hero, isn't he? But it's an interesting part of his potential character.
At heroes, it's a bit like when we were looking at the Gits. It's they have this reputation, but we're here to pick it apart, and we can say whether or not how accurate we think that is. But I think whilst it doesn't look like we can come out and say, wasn't he just a great guy? I think what we're certainly doing, you're sort of demonstrating to us, is that whether people think he's good or bad, or most people are a mixture of the both, is that he's not the person that people assume him to be. There's much more depth in his motivations and his actions, and he wasn't just a bit naff, basically. Bit naff.
I think what's fascinating about him is it was a strength that he had a belief in his own sovereignty. If Henry VI had a tenth of that belief in his own sovereignty, we probably wouldn't have had the Wars of the Roses. So that's a strength. He used it very well in the Peasants' Revolt, and he would use it well later in the Revenge Parliament. But because he had just a bit too much, he didn't use his real skills, which we see in the late 1380s into the 1390s, of being a masterful executor of thought out strategy.
Do you think it's because other people were just took the heavy-handed approach, and so that was what was expected, that was almost the norm, and so it came as a bit of a shock to people that someone had taken something a bit different and they didn't quite know what to do with him and how to behave around him, and that fed into his ultimate success at that point?
Yeah, I do. I think that with the confrontation at Radcott Bridge, where Richard's getting to a warden age, where he's getting into sort of his early 20s, so he's got to be undisputably the king pretty soon, you know. But he's already the king, but he's got to undisputably be within the era of his personal rule pretty soon, and he realistically probably already was. But it was like, okay, last chance, because if we do something now, we can say we're only going against his advisors and it's not against the king at all. Let that go much longer, and we can't. So I think you see some, and there's lots leading up to this, and lots going wrong in his household, and lots of the great blood of the realm feeling underrepresented. But I think they did know that they had a king who wasn't what they were used to, who was being pretty clear he wasn't going to play by the common rule book, and that give it 2 years, there wasn't much they could do about it, or at least not without risking their heads.
We're coming up to the hour, so to try and potentially leave on a positive high for Richard. You did mention there before about a chronicler who is clearly sympathetic. So did he have, and must have liked him. So is there a significant number of people who are actually liking Richard?
Yeah, there are. There are, both in terms of people in the day and historians since. There are people that recognise he was following recognised policies in lots of ways, and was not too far off doing a pretty good job of it if things had been a bit different. The account we have that's very positive is continental, and that could tie in partly because I believe it's a French monk or priest and his father-in-law was French, and there's a bit of impress the in-laws, so be nice to their representatives. And it may also be suggestive of his long-term policy objective being to become Holy Roman Emperor. We just don't know. So there could be a bit of be nice to the people you need to be nice to. But I think we know from his behaviour in the 1380s and 90s, Richard could be what he needed to be to people to get the job done. And I suspect if he wanted to be charming, he probably could be.
Right. So we don't know if it's genuine.
There must have been some genuine. I mean, one thing I would say is that both of his wives seem to really like him. One's a child, but they seem to have wanted to help him and support in the way that they did. So he may have been, for all he was a difficult man for the nobility to work with, I don't know if he was necessarily horrible in his what we would call personal relationships. I don't know. It's difficult to know.
The thing is, a lot of the nobility, this is a bit broad, but a lot of them slightly deserved it. I mean, not all of it, but the point being that, he probably was quite difficult for them to work with, but they can't have been a barrel of laughs, can they? Let's be honest about it.
Well,
most of them were, let's be honest, bloodthirsty nutters whose idea of a good time was cleaving a man's face into with a large sword and then coming home and dancing. Like, they weren't nice people either.
No, they really weren't. No. So,
Gareth, I know you said that you haven't read the Shakespeare, but are you familiar with how Shakespeare's Richard II gets embroiled in a potential political catastrophe in Elizabeth's reign? Have you been familiar with this?
No, I don't think I have. Elizabeth's a bit late for me.
So Shakespeare's Richard II is written towards the end of the Elizabethan reign. And his Richard II is a very weak, mercurial, ineffectual monarch who, of course, as we know in real life, does not have heirs. When it's written, the censor gets involved and says, fine, you can stage it, but you have to leave out the deposition scene that you've written. That cannot be staged.
Wow.
It's far too dangerous. The day before the Essex Rebellion, people loyal to Essex pay Shakespeare's company to stage Richard II with the deposition scene put back in.
Wow.
And potentially apocryphally, but Elizabeth is supposed to have said upon hearing about this, I am Richard II, know ye not that. The Essex Rebellion falls apart, Essex is executed. What's interesting is that nothing happens to Shakespeare's company. In fact, they go from being the Lord Chamberlain's men in Elizabeth's reign to almost at once becoming the King's men in James's reign.
Wow.
I'm of the opinion that either before they were approached by Essex or soon afterwards, somebody went and peached, probably to Cecil. And so it became this kind of political backbiting and backstabbing, very similar to the reign of Richard II. I just find that fascinating.
That is absolutely fascinating. And the thing is, it was risky to write about it all for Shakespeare, wasn't it? Because I guess, I don't want to embarrass myself with my dates, but in Elizabeth I's reign, writing about Richard II is not that different to, say, writing about Queen Victoria now. It wasn't that long ago in terms of trends and relationships and descendancy and all the rest of it.
Shakespeare does have a go, of course, at writing about Henry VIII. His play Henry VIII, also alternatively titled All Is True, that ends with Elizabeth's christening. Nothing more to see here.
Right. No heads will roll from now, that's for sure.
Everything is fine. There is nothing else that happens.
Well, that's interesting because me and Shakespeare are aligned, because basically I don't consider myself to have an area of expertise, but I would basically consider my areas of interest to be primarily 1399 to 1536. So probably the beheading of Anne Boleyn is where I feel it all gets too modern. It's more current affairs from then on for me. But so I'm sort of where Shakespeare ends is kind of where I'm ending. I really should see these plays, shouldn't I?
I think you might.
I'm going to say yes. I think that they are brilliant. And if you're down in London, pop along to the Globe. £5 or a tenner, you can go and stand in the yard, see them all.
But what if there's like a Marvel film out or something at the same time?
Do both.
Go after.
Do both?
Yeah. Matinee and then evening. Have a little din-dins in between. It's fine.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, it's worth doing. But then won't I be accused of being corrupted by Shakespeare and how he described the Third's stately reputation?
We've been corrupted by Kat. Me and Philippa have.
Yeah. She does seem corrupting.
What can I say?
I
mean, I have corrupted Catherine into the love of Shakespeare. I've dragged her down. She's been up the RSC. She's been over at the Globe. I've had her up all the places watching the Shakespeare.
Yeah, you can come with me, Gareth, and I'm seeing Hamlet in New. You can come with me to see Hamlet.
Oh, when are you going?
February the something. David bought me a ticket for part of my Christmas present.
Oh, that's really nice.
I know.
It's Christmas, isn't it? I've got to buy presents for people.
Yeah, buy them
I've
tickets.
only got like one friend, so it's fine.
I try to see Shakespeare. Hope that they don't like Shakespeare. Go instead.
Well, my other half, Gerard, he loves theatre, so he'd be very happy to do Shakespeare. He's an English teacher.
How have you avoided this then?
But he was a TV producer. He was a TV producer till 2 years ago. Then he became an English teacher. So I think I'm probably due to say I should do it. I just I don't know. It's a funny old it's a funny old thing, isn't it?
It's penance time. You all have to do those things, like when I drag David down to some sort of history event and he comes along, doesn't he? And he sometimes enjoys himself, but sometimes he's kind of there because he's doing his bit. Then sometimes he'll go to me, he does tabletop gaming and things, and he'll go, fishing. Do you want to come to these things? I'm like, no. I will in fact ruin it for you, because I will just be so obviously have no conception and the odd one out, and so actually you're just better off without me there, quite frankly. Just moaning about the cold or saying that I don't know what's going on and I need a wee and I don't like sausage rolls.
I think she moans on purpose so she doesn't have to go. And David's really hoping she'll change her mind.
Sideways form of weaponized incompetence. It's on that same sort of thing. So she's a pain in the arse. I'm not taking her.
So I got accused of weaponized incompetence the other day from a friend of mine. I know, because my other half was away and I didn't have any clean clothes, so I had to buy some because I don't know how to use the washing machine, and that was apparently deemed weaponized incompetence. It's difficult because actually my parents live next door, so I asked my mum to do it and she was like, no, you're 42 years old. I am just not going to in any way help you wash and iron clothes. Which fair play in hindsight.
So if we pretend that we've forgotten how to wear our designer shoes, we'll have to go and buy some more because we'll be able to learn how to put those ones on.
Exactly.
I would work, except I spend most of the day in slippers now.
It's the great thing about working from home is that you only need to be dressed from here up. Really,
I am. That, or if I go out the house, trainers. So I've got all these beautiful shoes. They never see the light of day anymore.
How many pairs of shoes have you got? Because I'm always fascinated by this.
I got rid of, I'm not joking, 50 pairs of shoes because, oh dear, a side effect of pregnancy is your feet grow. So none of my shoes fit me.
You told me that I could come and have a look through them because that was my shoe size was your old shoe size.
Yeah, but then I started nesting for this one and I lost the plot and I just threw everything away because I was having a mental breakdown about how my house looked. So I threw away all of my things.
Wow.
For me, it depends if you can count like trainers, so gym shoes and those kind of things, but probably about 40 or 50, I'd have thought.
Wow.
Right. Well, I have. Well, I'm very sad now because firstly, I have shoe envy, and secondly, I've just realised that Kat hates me. So
no, she doesn't hate you. She just hates a cluttered house more.
No, I'm interpreting that as an act of rejection.
Oh,
I would. That's what Richard II would have done.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Either that it wasn't yes, and she's come back and I've got rid of all her shoes.
I've actually got 3 pairs of shoes.
To be fair, that's probably all you need.
And one, and this is so middle-aged, one are driving shoes.
Oh, that is.
The reason is because I like wearing shoes that are too big, because I like my feet to breathe. And but you can't, it's quite hard to drive in them.
Just don't drive.
You have them already glued to the pedals.
Yeah, you catch.
Don't drive with shoes on. Me and David do that quite a lot. Just don't drive on your feet. Yeah,
I can do that.
That's if you get pulled over, you could get done for that. You know that, right? You're supposed to have shoes on.
I've heard that. Is that real?
No, because when I learnt to drive, and I learnt to drive more recently than a lot of people because of my epilepsy, and I had this conversation with my driving instructor because I was wearing trainers, and he said a lot of the time they say anything with a thicker sole like that is not good to drive in because you can't feel the pedals as well. So the thicker the sole of something and the more solid it is, the less responsive there actually is. So I said, well, okay, then I'll just take them off and drive nothing on my feet. He said, I don't know if you're allowed to do that. And we looked and we couldn't see anything that actually specifically said you are not allowed to do that.
That's interesting. And there are a lot of rules, so they have thought of most things. Someone told me you're not allowed to drive with gloves or something.
Well, I think that's one of those things where you drive. That's why you have driving gloves, isn't it? Because they allow you to maintain a good grip on the wheel.
I say a good pair of leather gloves.
Yeah, see, I would have thought that, but you know, like the sort of
driving gloves.
The ones you. Oh, how can I put this nicely? I probably can't. The ones you buy in Tesco's for $2.99 have probably not got a very good grip on them, have they, over a steering wheel? I'm not mocking them. I have those types of gloves because they're comfy and warm, but I wouldn't drive in them because I don't feel like I've got as good a grip on the steering wheel. It's a bit slidey. So I think if you're going to drive in gloves, I don't think there's any laws against it, but I think for health and safety,
when Catherine gets pulled over next, she can.
I'll ask. While I've got you out my speeding.
Yeah. What else would you have pulled me over for? If I give you a list, which ones of those would you have pulled me over for?
While I've got you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me.
But I'm not. I've had a bad health. I had a bad health and safety experience at the weekend, didn't I, ladies? My son had his birthday party. I don't know if I'm allowed to say where in case I get sued or something. But anyway, it was a place that involved things, a chain that has things in it that children can bounce up and down on.
Oh, yeah.
And they wouldn't let me light the birthday candles on his cake because of health and safety.
Oh, dear.
So I said, well, look, if you're worried about, well, actually, they said it to David, not to me. And my friend was going mad. And I said, well, I tell you what, then, what if I go down there and set fire to one of the tables and then they won't be worrying about the candles on the cake? But apparently, and then I tried to say, well, that's a sparkler, not a candle. But apparently that wasn't allowed either.
Oh, dear.
It seems
and then they wouldn't have, you have to wear these special socks with the grippy bits on the bottom. 2 of the kids were wearing them from another place with the bouncy things on that children go to, and they made them take them off to buy their brand instead.
Of course they did.
Oh, that's horrible.
We're all like, well, we're not coming back here again. Anyway, nobody had a serious accident and broke any bones, which was what I was worried about because my kids, well, my oldest son is Captain Accident. So that was more my concern, but everyone made it out in one piece. But my friend was quite cross and nearly had some sort of meltdown. It could have got nasty. But anyway, it didn't. But we all just put the candles in the cake anyway and sang to him. And then
just pretend to blow out.
Yeah. Luckily, I suppose his actual birthday was the day before and we'd done cake and candles and singing at home as well. But I was just like, for the love of all things holy.
You would have thought, given the amount of children's parties that are likely to take place in such a venue, they would have made it very clear in advance that couldn't happen.
Yeah.
See, that's a Richard II thing. He's allowed you to bring in the cake. He's allowed you to put the candles on it. But what he's done is last minute. Not right in
absolutely. It's quite Richard II. No, it is, and it's entirely vindictive. Like, he'd have had no health and safety, and he'd have waited till you all gathered around. The kids with the faces were lighting up, and then just as sure, but no, yeah,
it would extinguish your
Yeah.
flame.
And then even if he decided he was going to let you, he'd like make this big thing where the Queen has to drop to her knees and plead for the candle to be lit, just to string out the agony and the suspense for as long as possible. I can't believe I said this guy was my hero.
Well, the thing is,
It was an uphill battle, to be fair, but
I
he
love
actually
it.
did
something
quite
really
well.
fun. Like, as somebody who, despite what virtually everybody who claims to have a past life or whatever thinks they were somebody royal, I would almost certainly, as would most people, have been a serf. And there is something delicious about the thought of some big Billy Bollocks baron having to genuflect because some will-o'-the-wisp of a boy, some like twink in a crown, just looks at him funny, and he's got to like put his face on the rushes in the floor. There is something in my serf heart is absolutely delighted by that. I'm like, yeah, make him rub his face in it.
Yeah, but that is quite masochistic, though, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to say that hat doesn't fit, babe.
Well, actually, one final semi-serious point about Richard III, which I should have mentioned, going back into this cruelty thing. Of course, people know about the supposed duel between Bolingbroke, future Henry IV, and Mowbray, the then Duke of Norfolk, where they've had this be Rich says, right, you have to duel it out, and you'll duel to the death to decide who wins. He lets them get right up to his no, I can't possibly. You're both exiled. Again, huge cruelty and pleasure in that suspense.
Why am I enjoying this so much?
Well, exactly. It's like taking you right to the moment, and then no, okay. Now, arguably, that was a demonstration of power. So there was a.
So does he dress that up as what's the word?
Mercy.
Late at night, mercy sort of thing. Yeah. Does he dress it up like that, or does he allow it? Yes. All right.
A show of mercy, but
not just for the long.
There were other ways of doing it.
Yeah, not making them fight to the death in the first place.
For example,
quite.
Yeah.
I mean, I have no doubt that if we were watching a true crime documentary that was looking to analyze Richard II, those sorts of behaviors, there would be a psychologist up and down the TV program talking about how there was a kind of sexual thrill in this, that he's almost edging what's happening, and that there's a kind of sexual sadism there. Not that we have any evidence of that, but that we rarely do when they talk about this sort of stuff. But there is the amount of times that he does similar stuff. He, as you say, he enjoys it. He it gives him a frisson. I think he enjoys the power. I think
he
enjoys being the smartest person in the room. He's one of those people that enjoys being the smartest person in the room.
He's the only person in the entire country who can do that.
And I think he loves it.
How does that feel?
And since we're 9 years old, as well.
Oh, I want to be Richard II.
Like, who would like? How many of us would do that, or do something? You know, like
I'd like to say I wouldn't.
You would. You
but we all know the truth.
Yes. Let's be honest.
With that lie.
Have you guys ever heard Alison Weir talk about sort of Henry VIII sort of descent from sort of, happy, jolly Renaissance prince to tyrant? And what I love about what Alison says is you don't need a fall from a horse or anything like that to explain a behavior shift. Take any 17-year-old boy, and I've been a 17-year-old boy, quite a gay one, but a 17-year-old boy nevertheless. Let him do whatever he likes for 10 years. And actually it goes all right. It goes pretty well for everyone, and he's quite congenial about it, therefore. Then tell him he can't have something he wants most, and watch how he reacts as he manages his way through that situation. You don't need a majorly advanced psychological explanation to work out Henry VIII's transition. And maybe that is something about child kings, as we were alluding earlier. And not that that's not Henry VIII, but Richard II, do you need a major sort of psychiatry degree to be able to work out what might have been going on there?
No. Interesting. Oh, he is fascinating. I am really enjoying Helen's book. But I kind of would have liked to see what yours says as well. But
I wrote one of the reasons I like to do fiction is one of the things I think I am good at factual writing is I'm quite good at sort of doing lively bits. I did post on Facebook some sort of snippets from the work as it was going along, and there were some quite big drama moments, but that's only because you genuinely get such a sense of impending drama from the Chronicles. We're so well, I mean, bear in mind I've done a lot of my work is on Henry VII's reign, where you don't have the Chronicle accounts in the same way, so you are spoiled with all the vividness of the Chronicle accounts, which you don't get from later records in the same way.
Interesting.
So do we think, on balance, then Richard II should have fallen as a deceased git rather than a history hero, or are we?
Was he in our git series? He was, wasn't he? Was he not? Did we not cover Richard?
First was.
We didn't.
Richard first was, and
in
John.
Right.
But we didn't do him. No. We underlined about Richard III and decided it would be a bit too predictable, and we didn't want to get murdered in cold blood in our beds. So we left that.
Yeah.
But no, we didn't.
I don't know. I don't think he was a git. I think he's too troubled. You know what I mean? It's like he's too. I don't know. He's not a hero. He's not a hero, and I accept that. But he's fun to talk about, and I never really understood why there's not more pop culture around him.
Yeah, no, either way, we've talked about him this evening. I'm more worried about myself, to be quite honest with you.
You're now thinking what you would do with ultimate power.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest though, I do think it's fairly rare. I can't really think of a monarch that I know anything about who I would say is actually a hero. I think that Richard II gets a really raw deal compared to a bunch of other monarchs. I think what he offers in terms of art and patronage and learning paves a way for monarchs to be different in the future. I think he was misunderstood, but then also didn't help himself. But part of the things about heroics of historical figures is actually how much joy they give modern people interested in history. And as that goes, for in the top trumps of historicity and its interest, I would say that like Richard II is maximum damage because he is so fascinating. The art is so pretty, and he's like Joffrey levels Game of Thrones nutter. It's just he's this sprawling epic of a lunatic, and I love that for him. I love that for him, and that is heroic to me because he did the most. He did the most with the mental illness that he clearly had. Or maybe no, we didn't think he had mental illness, but he did the most with the particular foibles of personality and made himself into this glittering shitbag that's just delightful.
Glittering shitbag. That's very close to the topic that got us yeeted off YouTube. So just to warn you.
Oh yeah. But I mean, he put it another way. Then he had main character energy before it was a thing.
Yeah, I'm all over that.
Definitely had a brat summer.
and honestly, if it hadn't been for that final mistake with Bolingbroke, I think it would have worked. Who knows what would have happened then?
Gosh, we could carry on talking about him for hours.
That would be a great history, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I think it's possible he never would have had kids, and so who the crown would have gone to would have been up for dispute.
Well, he could have told two people that they needed to have a fight to the death for it, and at the last minute gone, no, not really.
He does seem to have left the question of the succession deliberately ambiguous and sent very mixed messages. But then again, which people said, well, that's terrible. A policy Elizabeth I pursued with great effect, not so many decades after. So again, Is he ahead of his time?
I entirely love him now. I was sort of indifferent about him, but now I think he's fabulous.
No,
Yeah, he's certainly fabulous. He's
For all
definitely
the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
I just take something and lie down.
It's kind of like, I don't know if he was gay, but if he was gay, he was a mean gay. but sort of the mean gay that you like.
As long as you're not in the kind of immediate vicinity of.
Yeah.
Observe from afar. Lol, look what he's up to.
The sort of gay guy that quotes Steel Magnolias to delicious effect. If you've got nothing nice to say, come sit by me. And you're like, yes, bitch, please.
Yeah.
I love it.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gareth.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
It was great. I've learned a lot.
We'll have you back. So
yeah, we could have gone on for another. We could have gone on for hours more. We could.
Yeah, I love it. Like I say, I think this is such. I love what you guys are doing. I think it's, we need more. We need to do history differently, and I think that this is the best thing I've seen online that's trying to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That,
it's a little bit unnecessary. I won't make you duel to the death with somebody else and then stop it at the last moment.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
She's a goddamn liar.
Your words.
You're not going to edgelord me then.
I won't. No.
She will. She defo will.
I tell you what, when I get Elon Musk's time machine, you'll be the person I'll go traveling with. Them two could stay here.
No,
we'll just reap the benefits, or probably otherwise, of your
forbidden travel.
I will be no benefits for you two for trying to stop me going for the last however many years. Me and Gareth are going to go and have an absolutely fucking wicked time.
With
and
all
we're
due
going to come back
respect,
and not tell you anything.
Considering how you interact with your phone and computer, just because you are a cursed being when it comes to technology, I'm going to say
Elon Musk with me. I don't need to do it myself.
Your presence is enough, babe.
Yeah.
Maybe
the cursed child.
Even Elon will be scratching his head, thinking, "I've no idea what's gone wrong now." And you'll be like, "Oh, it's me," and he'll be
then there's an achievement in itself that I can take to my, not many people.
It'll be deemed the Catherine effect on tech. That's what go in all the textbooks.
I think it should be called that anyway.
Of course you do, babe. Of course you do.
I might try and put that as an entry. Oh, can you put your own entries in on Urban Dictionary? Because if you can, that's what I'm going to do. And
you can on Wikipedia.
Yes, you can do what you like.
Yeah, do what you like, babe. Go wild.
Like on Wikipedia.
Go wild. Right. This one's about to kick off.
Yeah,
he's so adorable.
So he's done very well.
He has.
We're not here next week.
Well, I was going to say,
we're not.
What's happening next week?
We're not here.
Right. That's what's happening next week. So hopefully I'm going to be able to find something for you from the archives.
The vault.
Probably. Hoping, therefore, because it will be on my old MacBook. And let's hope the Catherine effect won't come into play and I'll be able to sort something out. So that's next week. And then we're not telling you what's happening the week after that because
we will be around the week.
You will like it. You will.
Yes. Yes. I know.
Yes. It's going to be very amusing.
Gareth, do you want to remind people where they can find you before we?
Oh yeah. So I'm on Royal History Geeks, which is my blog and social media stuff on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. But you can actually find me on Blue Sky just as myself as Gareth Beag or Gareth Benjamin Streeter. I can't remember what my Blue Sky is actually. But if you follow the 15th century starter pack, Nathan and Amin very kindly, very generously added me into that, so you can get me that way.
I can't. Oh, there is. It's either Sharon Bennett Connolly or Christy Dean have done early to mid medieval as well.
Okay.
I'll try and find it for you.
Yeah, I'm quite late medieval.
Yeah, but I just like I don't really understand what's going on if I'm being
I know. I think it's good, but I don't understand it.
Yeah.
We're all like that when it begins.
Yeah, we'll get there though. It's nice that everybody's there. I like that.
Yeah.
We're all there. We just don't know what's happening.
I really do. If though, friends, you have enjoyed what you've seen here, please you can show your appreciation and gratitude by buying us Winnebagos. You can do that at www.buymeacoffee.com/had podcast. That's what you can do. That's also a place where you can that's also a place where you can get on our close friends on Instagram. Chill out. Oh, take it from here.
On borrowed time. Yes, so you can become one of our close friends, which means that Catherine finds, I mean, sometimes it's history related, often it's beaver related things to share with you, which she used to share just with us. So we're quite glad that you all now get to see them too.
You'll have to suffer as well.
Yeah, you have to suffer too. Please, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, do that. Like this video, click the bell icon to get notifications supposedly of when we next go live. And
you can find our merch store at Teespring. Just search for History After Dark, and we have Timmy things. We have rough beavers. I got my rough beaver out for that. We have War Boner. We have Classic History After Dark. Philippa, show us your bits. Are you wearing it?
I am.
Okay, look.
Very nice.
It's a dark hoodie. My Wednesday uniform.
On the internet things, we have all of that down there. So check out our stuff on Teespring. You can also subscribe to our Substack, which is History After Dark Hub at substack.co.uk. So we'll be doing lots
found it. There we go.
Oh, brilliant. So we'll be doing, as Kat and I mentioned briefly last week, we just touched on, keep an eye out for that. We'll be telling you some stuff that we're going to be doing with that fairly soon. So you need to go down and subscribe to that there. It's absolutely free, and it means that you will get information and access to cool shit before other people do who haven't bothered to go down and do that. And that will serve them right. Yeah, you've been warned and all of that business. Is there anything else? What did I forget? I'm sure.
Once again, massive thank you to you, Gareth, for taking the time to hang out with us.
Absolutely. Really,
we're looking forward to having you back again soon. This was an absolute joy.
Thank you.
And I will count us out. So, friends, be good. If you can't be good, be careful. And if you can't be careful, don't get caught. We're going to leave in 3, 2, 1. Bye.